best entertainment on the earth. Tune in for Comics with Perch.
Hey everybody, this is Perch. What isn't problematic? Do audiences really change over time? This mail from a viewer, I think, hits the nail on the head a little bit about this situation, and it's good. This is the kind of stuff we need to do more of, is question the things we're being told. So this is something that gets said a lot, and well, you'll recognize the mail. It says, "Hey Perch, I think you and I and many people who listen to you have been told at some point that some movie, TV show, or comic book that they love hasn't aged well or is problematic. And it often comes down to people saying that audiences would reject this stuff now. For instance, in comics, the claims that audiences would reject busty women or damsel in distress stories. And I just find myself wondering, but would they? Or would you reject it and then tell everyone else they should too?" Yeah, it's that second one. Anyway, this is a good mail, but it goes on. "You mentioned recently She-Hulk was turned into Savage She-Hulk, partly to dispel the porn star She-Hulk image. Not exactly, by the way. There wasn't a porn star image. It was one guy, David Goyer, said this, that he believed that She-Hulk was basically the porn star version of the Hulk. It was unclear if he said this as kind of a joke or he was stupid or what exactly he. It's still a little confusing what prompted him to say that, but that was something he said. And then Marvel kind of freaked out and be like, "Oh yeah, we don't want to be associated with that." And then some people on Twitter is like, "Yeah, she is a porn star." And then this was during a time period, by the way, where some people on Twitter were claiming that She-Hulk was a trans version of Bruce, and I mean, just people were being stupid is the key. And then Marvel blinked and reacted like they often do. But anyway, but was there anything suggesting audiences rejected this image, meaning the John Byrne, She-Hulk that Goyer said was a porn star? There was not. In fact, there was evidence to the contrary, because the pre-orders for John Byrne's She-Hulk were selling incredibly well, as were posters and other pieces. I mean, there was plenty of evidence to suggest that audience were still very much behind that version of the character. Anyway, the mail continues. "I still find younger people who love Two and a Half Men." I doubt you there, sir. Anyway, "and while plenty of young people didn't watch it, not having watched something isn't the same as rejecting it. But oftentimes I find people are conflating the shift to new tastes with a rejection of this stuff. A big one for me is people telling me American Pie is problematic. I get that pretty much every time I say I like it online. But I bet money that if it came out today, same script and story, it would make money. You're goddamn right it would. It would get destroyed on Twitter, but I think audiences haven't moved on that much. I think many writers, creators, and whatnot would like for audiences to have moved on. I just don't believe that they have. I think comedy is still comedy. Good action is still good action. Men still like big boobs on Power Girl, and people are fine with damsel in distress stories. Even if the particular shows and movies and comics are dated isn't the same as irrelevant or not funny anymore. It just means some stuff is harder to relate to. Do you personally believe that audience tastes are that dramatically different today to 20 years ago, or do you think the creative types just want for us to change our tastes? I find that when you get people off their phones, they're just as edgy and goofy as they were in 2000. I find it especially hard to believe audiences have truly moved on since we're basically living in the 80s part 2 in terms of content and franchises." So that's the mail, and it's entirely correct. So look, there's a reason why, if there's a movie poster and it's got a girl and she's showing some cleavage, that still sells well. There's a reason why women today walking around the mall in expensive outfits wear push-up bras or show some leg or show. There's a reason why women are still walking around in high heels. Now we can complain about that and say it's problematic and people have moved on. It's not, that's not what people want anymore. But go to any club, go to any expensive location, and what do you know? The women who are going to the club are wearing short dresses and high heels, and all the rest are doing everything they can to accentuate their body, because it's timeless. And I definitely think there's writers in comic books who would like for that not to be the case. There's people on Twitter who would love for that not to be the case, but it is what's happening. It's the truth. That doesn't mean you need to be consumed by it. And this is where the extremes are always where you get yourself into trouble. No, you should not have to look like a porn star in order to get a job, unless I guess your job is in porn. But I mean, if your job is working in an office, no, you shouldn't. You don't need to put out for your boss. If you're trying to get a role, you shouldn't have to sleep with a producer for a movie to get that role. No, those things are wrong. But it doesn't mean that that there's not an idealized version of women and men. Look, I mean, what's funny about a lot of this kind of stuff is while everybody's talking about problematic She-Hulk and everything else, there's still people are unabashedly have no problems with making comments about how good Nightwing's ass looks like, or the fact that the superheroes are flying around are not drawn with weak chins and kind of flabby guts and love handles, or they don't kind of sit and kind of slouch around. The men are still drawn with eight packs and muscles and wearing skin tight outfits and all the rest, and they're done that way because that's also an ideal. Just like there's idealized women, there's idealized men. And I understand that some people have worked themselves up that's an impossible standard. Yeah, you're probably right. It's an impossible standard. And your point is what? I mean, I'm never going to look like Nightwing. I mean, but that's not a goal in my life. Just like I might like looking at Frank Joe or J. Scott Campbell versions of women, but I don't expect that they surround. My hope is not that my daughter grows up to look like a J. Scott Campbell drawing. Both things can be true. I want a nice, fair, good world for my children. I have two girls, so I want them to live in a good, fair, equitable, place where they have equal opportunities and all the rest. Absolutely, I want that. But I'm not going to wander around trying to change male and female DNA and just kind of the very nature for how people, see beauty that's been hardwired into our system since the dawn of time. That's absurd. And so when you and to your point about American Pie, absolutely. Why? Because the jokes in there are fairly timeless. I mean, there's some dated stuff in there, but guy wants to have sex. Somebody makes a talk about how it's like a pie. The guy puts his dick in the pie. I mean, that's going to make people laugh. Whether it's out today, 20 years ago, it's going to make people laugh. The long drawn out joke of the nerdy band camp girl putting a flute up her hooch. I mean, that's going to make people laugh. That it always will. The idea that a bunch of teenage boys really want to score before they graduate is, again, whether it's 2022, 2000, 1980, we can make lots of comments like, ooh, that concept is problematic. Men wanting to have sex with women, I don't know if we can say that stuff out loud. I mean, you can do whatever you want in Hollywood, but that is still a situation that is identifiable to the audience. And no amount of Twitter is going to change that. No amount of angry memes. No amount of you should. It's. I was watching somebody haranguing. God, what was the movie? I think it was Birds of Prey, and people were pissed. Like this is supposed to be a feminist movie, but I see we still have Harley Quinn in a push-up bra. It's like, yeah, because they want to sell tickets, and boobs do that. And you getting really pissy about that is not going to change that fact. I'm sorry. I mean, this is the stuff, and this is where people, I think, go to great efforts to try and convince them out of the obvious. And the obvious is, if you're going to do a superhero comic, people are going to want idealized versions of men and women fighting a villain who is sinister and is doing kind of evil deeds. And at some point, the heroes will have to dig deep and defeat them using some combination of powers and action and trickery to get the job done and save humanity. That story outline is pretty tried and true. And it's tried and true for a reason, because it works. So, again, you can say this is problematic. You can say it's dated and everything else, but the only thing that are really dated about the old movies is the technology that they used to film them. The CGI looks bad. The costuming looks a little cheaper. I mean, if you go watch Star Wars, the one that was out in the 70s, so I mean, we're coming up on 50 years removed from that movie. 50. Star Wars holds up. And people are still watching and enjoy it today. definitely you look at it and you're like, some of these effects look a little dated, because they are. But it turns out a story around somebody dreams of a better life, gets pulled into some kind of galactic battle, goes to rescue the princess because she looks super hot in her little white costume, and she thinks she's beautiful, and then they have to band together to defeat the evil guy with his army who's blowing up planets. I mean, that tends to work. If you try and decompose, decompress, deconstruct that storyline too much, you will ruin it, and they have. But the basics work, and I think that there's a lot of talk about this. This wouldn't age well. Yeah, I think it ages. Most stuff ages just fine. The stuff that doesn't age well is the stuff where, they're throwing around casual racism because at one point back in the 50s, not one point, but in the past, casual racism was, for whatever reason, acceptable to do in movies, and today it's not. Plenty of people in your audience, by the way, even if it's unacceptable to say those things, will still laugh at those jokes. It turns out, that I mean, look, when the Prime Minister of Canada is doing blackface to be part of his party, you know damn well that if he didn't get caught, he would do that for Halloween this year too, because he thinks that's funny. Is it funny? Not to me, but there are plenty of people who still laugh at it. That's the stuff that doesn't age well, the stuff that's just socially unacceptable. But that is a small bucket and does not include things like beauty, which is aged about the same as everything else for the past, I don't know, 2,000 years. Go figure. Anyway, there's always some historian that shows up here. It's like, well, actually, back in 1000 BC, a short woman who was extra hairy and weighed 500 pounds was preferable to a super hot model. That's how they thought back then. So standards of beauty have changed. No, they have not. That's a bunch of crap. And come back when you actually lived during that time period and have proof. Otherwise, I'm going to say no. Anyway, thanks for listening. Thanks for the question, and thanks for listening.